We made it. There we go. Andrea, how are you today?
Good, thank you. It's great to be here.
Yes, I am very excited to talk to you. I re-listened to the Ken Bai interview, I don't know if that was an interview. That was more of a, how would you call that? That wasn't an interview. That was more like a thesis, almost in a way, like three people sharing three different distinct points.
Yes, the Half-Life Alyx thing
Yes.
about the architecture and immersive design. Yeah, that was an awesome event.
Yes, that was a lot of fun to listen to. Before we get into things like that, though, for people who are listening who may not be familiar with you, can you tell people a little bit about yourself, what you're into, and how you got into VR?
I am very much into three things, architecture, VR, and philosophy. And pretty much everything I do, from talks that I give to the way I run my little company, is about merging those three things.
It is a little earlier right now for me than I think it is you, and I apologize. I am waking up right now. But because of that, I had kind of a question for you to kind of get things flowing and get my thoughts. I know that, oh, well, at least I don't know, but I have never seen you describe yourself as like a VR philosopher. However, I think a lot of people put that label on you because some of the thoughts that you put out there are pretty deep. They make you think. You and I have both bought into VR. Many people have. You quit your job to go into it. I'm working on quitting mine to find a career that's different, in a good way. But I kind of want to ask you this, since you and I both bought in early. When we're telling other people about VR, and when you tell people, what are you personally selling them on? And I mean that, are you selling them on gaming? Are you selling them on utility? What can be done now? The dream of it all? As early enthusiasts like you and I, when you talk to somebody, what's your goal when you're discussing VR with them? What are you selling to them that's important?
Oh, wow, that's a great question. So the short answer is I don't. I
Okay.
don't sell VR. We had the first year of our little company, we did try to sell VR, and we spent an incredible amount of time going into companies that were kind of interested in it but didn't really know what it was. And we realized very fast that that's just not doable for
Mm,
a little startup in an emerging technology. We just do not have the manpower and the
yes.
funding to like educate people on VR. So right now, I don't. I only talk this. I mostly talk about VR with people in the VR community, or who already, even if they haven't tried VR, already come to me with a super strong passion and interest in finding out.
When you like, because I'm with you, I try to sell VR less and less. Like I specifically had a few instances where people bought VR because of something I said, and then comments that were made after made me realize that you can't. It's still a learning process. I don't know how to tell someone about VR because what I pitched them wasn't intrinsic to what they maybe had wanted. The more you're in VR right now and you're meeting new people who keep joining, are you finding any commonalities that you find more easily able to not convince people to try VR, but where you're noticing trends of why people are jumping in, or is it all over the board?
I think it's all over the board. And what I'm trying to do is offer a very particular angle on
Hmm.
VR, which has to do with my background in architecture and philosophy, and kind of see what sticks. Like, there are people super passionate about VR who don't necessarily vibe with my angle on it, and that's totally fine. And I'm also seeing more and more people who do. So I feel like this is the most I could do to help the community grow, which is bring different angles to it that might potentially help other people
Hmm.
from these other adjacent disciplines that I come from see VR and get it. Like that, I'm trying to maybe be a little bit of a bridge from people who come from a heavy theoretical humanities background or architecture spatial design
Hmm.
background. Um, and I'm seeing that starting to work. So if more people from different disciplines start to do the same thing, I think we're gonna be good.
What are they pushing back on specifically? And maybe not a direct concept, but when you're bringing your particular point of view to the space and people maybe are pushing back and or just brushing it off as not now, because sometimes that's all it is. Are you finding any particular reasons that they're not buying in right away or why they're pushing back?
Yeah, so for example, in architecture, a lot of people in the VR community list architecture as one of the main things that might be revolutionized by VR because it's kind of a low-hanging fruit. But people from within architecture, most of them do not like VR very much. They don't see much potential in it. They just see it as the latest thing in a long list of technological visualization techniques.
Okay, I can understand that. So my wife's father is an architect, and I brought up VR to him, and I agree with you. The only things he's ever brought up with it, and he's interested, but it's the visualization of how to make something. Granted, he can make it at scale in VR, which is nice, but it's just the visualization. He's not thinking anything else. Getting right into architecture, we can jump right in there. Can we start in the game world? Because that's something I was thinking of. I was just playing VR chat for the most part the other day, and every world, like the more I play it, the more I'm actually looking around and kind of thinking like, why did we do this? Why did we do that? And an observation I had is that like a lot of the architecture, when you're like IRL architecture, in my mind, and I'm sure you can educate me on this, a lot of it is due to possibly the constraints or limitations or what the materials that we have to work with can do. With VR, those restrictions are gone, yet I'm seeing just the same functions IRL architecture types into VR. And I'm wondering if that's just how people are starting out, if that's where you see things going, or are we doing too much of exactly what we have IRL in VR? Like, is there a lot of room here for trying new things?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think there are many reasons for that. I see two big reasons. One is, since the industry is so new, where things haven't settled yet in terms of who are the people who are supposed to design these virtual environments, because we don't have any kind of profession that I feel is 100% qualified for the particular challenges of virtual spaces. And what I'm trying to do, and there are a few other traditionally trained architects, we're trying to say, look, we think this kind of new discipline should be claimed by architecture and architects, because we know how to design space and we're the only discipline like taught how to design space. But then we also see a lot of like game environment designers jumping in, and we see a lot of 3D artists jumping in and doing very cool stuff. And there are struggles that I see on both sides. So I see traditionally trained architects struggle to reimagine architecture without gravity, because we spend our entire education and career developing an intuition for the forces of gravity. And everything is supposed to be tied to that. Like a good design shows a deep knowledge of construction techniques, and that has to do with how the forces kind of flow through the building downwards. And then you have to throw that hard-earned intuition out of the window and ask yourself, well, what could a space look like without that? And it's damn hard to answer that question. Then when I move over and look at spaces designed by 3D artists and environment artists, I feel that they're lacking what the architects have, which is an understanding of the procession through space. They tend to think of spaces as, okay, this is the room, or this is the level where you're shooting some things. Whereas in architecture, we should be learning, a lot of us don't, about how the concept of a building has to come out from your interaction as a subject with a building, whether you're contemplating something in a corner or you're walking through a hallway from room A to room B and so on. So it's that dynamic interaction between what we call subject and object that should produce some feeling or some ideas, which is the concept. And I feel that 3D artists are lacking a bit experience in that department, and that's also because maybe they don't normally deal with immersive things, right? What they
Sure.
produce stay on the 2D screen, whereas what architects produce eventually gets turned into a real life one-to-one scale object,
Yes.
which is immersive by definition.
I like the thought process of having someone with little to no game background creating the architecture in games. So I was recently asked a question at an interview for a job I was highly unqualified for, just due to my background. I didn't have any, but the superpowers I'd want, it was like, what superpowers would you want for this job? Flying in X-ray vision, because that gives me a unique perspective, because I have no background already for knowing what you guys need. And with those two superpowers, I'm not only going to have my entire background that's different thinking, but now I'm seeing everything from different perspectives and the X-ray vision to put as much of a plan together. And just like when I hire an employee, sometimes I don't want him to have any, or her to have any industry experience, because they're going to come with unique thought processes. And that's something that I think is powerful to, I'm with you. Game developers always have a certain mindset. Architects are going to have a different one. Can we get into like specifics? So like, we'll just, since I know you're very familiar with Half-Life Alyx, what are some of these architectural designs that are importantly and being used correctly, or value added to like an end user that we probably don't even recognize? Like in my head, I'm thinking like doors I know are a big problem in VR. I don't fully understand the problem because that's above my knowledge, but I know doors are specifically a big issue.
Yeah, this is awesome. So doors typically only open in one direction, unless the only exception are doors in a hospital, for example, that have to kind of swing.
Sure.
But the problem with those is that they're kind of hard to lock. So you can't just lock them with the thing in the middle. They usually have bolts that go into the floor and up into the ceiling. So because of that, most doors have to swing in one direction. So what we saw with Half-Life Alyx is if the door had only gone in one direction and there was like a dead body on the other side, you'd just get stuck there forever.
Yes.
So I thought that was amazing. And well, the thing with, I'll say one thing I really loved about the environment in Half-Life Alyx, and one thing that I didn't. The stuff that I thought was phenomenal is that you would be in some level, and in the distance you would see something amazing, and there would come a level where you would find yourself there.
Mm-hmm.
And I just love that. I remember when I was in high school, we took a trip to the Grand Canyon, and I got there, and there's this like kind of like a view platform, and I got there, we got off the bus, and I looked, and it looked amazing, but it looked still like this poster I had in my room. Like I couldn't process that was the poster, and now I'm actually there and it's real. So it didn't look real at all. And then we hiked down, and we spent the next 5 days hiking down and then back up, and then it became real. So I feel like a lot of VR experiences or games, they have these amazing environments in the background that you never get to. Mm-hmm. And in Half-Life, you could actually get there, which made them more real. So that was by far my favorite part.
So like the Citadel would be a good example of that. From like the beginning of the game, you see the Citadel from like the opening like 2 minutes, and and throughout the entire game, you're actually working your way closer and closer to it. And in the level design, it is getting closer and closer. So you're tangibly, basically walking there without realizing it and building this world. So I'm with you on that fully.
Yeah. They never showed anything amazing that you couldn't like eventually get there. And actually you almost knew that if something looks so amazing it catches your eye, they will make you get there at some point.
And what was the part that you didn't like? I'm curious about that one.
Well, they did not deal well, except for the last chapter, which is an important exception, of course, they did not really deal with the issue of what is architecture without gravity.
How so?
Well, I know the story is what it is, but basically, it didn't feel like I am discovering a new type of environment.
Okay.
It still felt like, quote unquote, the normal environment.
So, okay, so I'm with you. So we're talking about the level where you're going through the house, where dimensions are kind of distorting and you're not really sure where you are. That's the level we're talking about, correct?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's the level we're talking about. And that's the one that Jeff, and that level is what I was discussing with Kenbai in that event. And I love that part. And I wish I would be able to play a game where everything is following that proposition.
Yes. Yeah, that makes sense to me. Because I remember that level. That level was a little confusing at times, and not just because of it trying to shift your perspective of what is up and down. Because putting chairs in the ceiling is going to already skew your perception of things. But it was a little confusing of what was going on. One thing I pulling on Half-Life Alyx, but something I've only seen Half-Life Alyx do and not other games for the most part, is like I grew up with like playing RPGs and long games, and I'm a collector at heart. I got to collect every little herb and rock and anything in the area. Who knows when I'm gonna need it? I want to collect it all and touch everything. Half-Life Alyx was great in the sense that I do feel like I could touch everything. Like, yeah, it may not all be collectible or interactable, but generally speaking, like if you are using the index controllers and you touch a ledge, Alex's hands wrap around the ledge. There's substance to it. It was nice. But a lot of other games, what is interactable, I don't know. And I end up walking around, reaching, and my hand just phasing through things because I don't know what's interactable or not, and mostly they're not. Is that just a design of the times where we can't, we're not going to put the time like Valve did into Half-Life Alyx to make everything like that? Or is this a solution that maybe like an architectural solution where by the design of the level, it'll help the user understand immediately what doors can be accessed, what drawers can be opened? Is there an architectural part of this that's going to help the end user?
I think it's a game design decision from a cognitive perspective. So what I'm seeing even with some of our clients right now is it depends what's the highest priority for that game or application. If it's to provide gameplay that you can get into immediately, then you cannot overcharge things with new approaches and new takes. So if you noticed in that last level in Half-Life where you said when they were kind of mirroring the rooms and everything and it was kind of confusing, they did not have any proper gameplay in there because you had such a high cognitive load trying to figure out what is going on here, this kind of confusing, that you wouldn't have been able to also cope with like shooting stuff.
Okay.
So
yes.
That decision was probably by design. And in terms of going back to VR applications and games in general, I'm seeing two diverging paths. One is provide things with low cognitive cost so people can jump into gameplay immediately because everything is kind of familiar.
What would be a good example of that? Like Beat Saber?
Yeah, or even the first 8 chapters of Half-Life,
Okay.
where there are a few more things you had to practice, like the thing with the gravity gloves in the beginning, but everything else, once you got that, was pretty kind of straightforward.
Sure.
And then I'm seeing a more experimental take on VR, which embraces or assumes the responsibility of cognitive overload because of new experiences. And those are usually the kind of VR stuff that's shown at Tribeca or these things, and it's not clear what the audience is for them because we have people that use VR for training, so that's kind of clear. Like you can't you can't, if someone is in a VR application to learn how to use some kind of tool or tractor, you obviously can't put cognitive overload on them by showing them some mirrored environment or stuff. Then if someone is in VR to shoot zombies, that's amazing. But again, they're not interested in being challenged with other things. And then we only have a niche left of VR audience that does want to be challenged. So I wish there was, I mean, I'm hoping to see more conversations about this, because in the same time, I think this third category is extremely important for VR, because this is the category that's experimenting with new things. And I do think that seen in context, and by context, I mean, if we think of the fact that 14-year-olds are now spending more and more time in VR, they're going to have a much lower cognitive barrier in dealing with these things than we are. So things are shifting quite rapidly, and there's enormous potential for extremely valuable ideas to come out of these experimental things that especially the young people are going to pick up, and that's going to become more like what makes VR truly different than any other possible experience.
Sure. Have you seen any, or can you provide any examples of that third group, the ones who really are experimenting with a high cognitive load, with a lot going on? I have a feeling it's going to be something on Steam or App Lab at this point, because that's probably not something a store like Oculus is going to allow, because all they care is the end user experience. It has to be pretty stable across end users. But something with a high cognitive load, it's going to be hard to predict who's going to be able to handle something like that. So I'm assuming it's more experimental, like App Lab or Steam, that's going to have something like that.
Yeah, so it's almost everything that's shown at festivals. Right now, the Museum of Other Realities is usually hosting them. But yeah, this group is lacking both models for funding and for distribution. So if there's one thing that I'm worried about when it comes to the future of VR, is this.
Sure, because basically, for them to get funding, they need to be able to appeal to a wide audience. To be able to take a risk, that's going to take your visibility. Right now, there's only one place that's really coming from, but they're not going to tolerate any experience that they can't fully control, which in a way, I agree with you. It's a problem. I also understand it. Quality. Apple's built on a certain standard. Facebook's trying to make a certain standard. Steam doesn't have a standard, let's be honest, which is great, because that's where I found, I used the Museum of Other Realities once, because you find cool stuff like that on Steam, but you're just not going to find that somewhere else. What do you think it will take for studios or developers or people to get funding for projects like that? Is it just straight time, or would it be Valve getting back in with the next version of VR, something like that?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't have a great answer for that. I like studios that are starting to experiment with community funding models. So we've seen 2 or 3 at least that are trying to fund experimental stuff through Patreon. I think a lot of university departments are trying to sponsor some groups of students that are doing more experimental stuff. But yeah, there's just really not much out there. And yeah, I also understand the problem. I mean, I think intrinsically there is a small audience. So you're not going to get investor throwing money at something that has such a small audience. But I don't know, it's basically it's a huge risk, right? Because if you do have some brilliant new locomotion or some completely brilliant concept that comes out of one of these experimental stuff, then you can knock it out of the park.
Yes. Yeah, that makes sense. I think, I don't have an answer either. I think it's going to take a lot of time. I think time is going to be the game. When it comes to these architectural designs that are inside the virtual world, is the virtual world going to be separate in your mind from the real world, or are a lot of these architectural designs that we're going to start seeing popping up in VR coincide with a transformation of the IRL world? Is there going to be a merging, or is this mostly going to stay separate in your mind?
I think there will be a merging in that we will see more physical spaces designed with this idea of hybridity in mind. So what I mean is I'm hoping to see physical buildings that will have areas where you put on some VR goggles, or if you're already wearing goggles and they have AR on them, you would enter a virtual wing that kind of spins off the physical wing of the building. So the concept of the building will be a unitary concept, but it will include physical spaces and virtual counterparts.
That makes sense. So in a way, AR is going to be probably more powerful for the mixing of these two than VR will be.
I mean, ideally, I would like some kind of, and this is like still not doable, of course, for a long time, very sci-fi, still some kind of goggles that are light to wear, that have AR and VR somehow magically. So yeah, I'm personally way more into VR than AR, but I think they're kind of, I think of them as totally separate things. So I always stay away from AR or VR kind of conversations.
Sure. No, that makes sense to me. One thing I've been trying to figure out, like when it comes to like these games, and like right now, like I kind of brought up at the beginning, I find a lot of them, the architectural designs in these games are built mostly off IRL. We're just transitioning as people. We're learning because you have to take what you know when you're starting out learning something new to apply it and then branch out from there. I'm curious on how you see it as things evolve and there's newer and newer, crazier and unique architectural designs in games. What's the thought process on designing those? Are we designing them with aesthetics in mind first? Is it utility first? And if it is utility, like how do you measure that? Because is it fairly similar across the board? You can make something to apply to a lot of people, or is someone's like intrinsic tendencies inside warping how they'll use it in the first place? Like for example, I see like someone like an architect paves a path, like this is where I want people to walk. And then you see these patches of grass that have been turned to mud because people decided on the way they wanted to go. And I'm curious, like, how do you mitigate that when you're designing architecture in games?
Yeah, I love this question. So I will start with how we do that for physical architecture. So we start from two things. We start from the idea that physical spaces are designed for the human body. So they need a relationship to the human body. And whenever you design a room that is absolutely huge, so there is no relationship to the human body, you always do that with some clear reason in mind, like, you know, churches or temples are made to have this kind of, they're made to make you feel small by design.
Yes.
And houses and apartments and so on, bedrooms are made to be cozy in size and proportion by design. So, and then the second thing that we design for is the human activity that takes place there. So the space has to be able to gently control and choreograph and house that human activity. So it's not supposed to hinder it, it's supposed to promote it, but that implies a very clear understanding of that human activity. So when I take these things to VR, I run into a lot of unanswered questions that are actually very interesting. So who are we designing for in VR? Like, who are we in VR? There is no clear answer for me to this question. I think we are slightly different kind of creatures in VR than in physical reality. I think in time we're gonna develop thinking patterns and cognitive pathways that are gonna be distinct for virtual worlds that we do not use in physical reality. It's not clear to me what the virtual body is. The virtual body could be anything.
Is it? I'm sure it's similar, but is it even a different category too? So you have your IRL self, and then to someone on social media, I think there's a semi-different consciousness. That's how they act on social media. Is it same, or there's another, like, is the game avatar self very similar to the social media self, or is it like a whole nother being that we're learning at the same time?
I believe is the latter. I believe for me it will be a whole other kind of being, because the difference which is significant is that in the virtual world, the designer of that virtual world has control over our entire perception, which does not happen with social media, no matter how powerful it is at this point. When you go into VR, if I design that application, I control what you see. I control your eyes. Yes. I can like touch a slider in my game engine and you're going to see like a fly. So what people don't understand is that it's not a given that when you go in VR, the game engine has set everything so that it looks like human vision. There are lots of slider on that camera/eyes component. And if you touch any of them, and there's a wide range of things you can code and do with them, all of a sudden your quote unquote human vision is gone. So it's, you can, and then you can just keep going and going, right? So you can control vision. You can obviously control as a developer that person's modalities of moving. You can control that person's feeling of the body, what's called proprioception. We have amazing studies coming out of places like Stanford that talk about this thing they call homuncular flexibility, which is brain plasticity and the ability of the brain in VR to immediately, like within minutes, feel like we have 5 arms and are an octopus. So that kind of stuff is absolutely at our fingertips. It's like you don't need the Stanford lab. All you need is a game engine to do that. So there's this unprecedented ability of a VR developer to control sensorial input, to interface with the motor and the visual cortex of that person at the deepest possible level. Will these kind of changes start to change what people think? Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. So like we're there in terms of means. We're just not there in terms of people are not ready
sure
to go there.
I've got to imagine it's pretty hard also, kind of, we've kind of, you got into a second point, then we went backwards a little bit, and I might misstate that second point, so correct me if I'm wrong. But on the, whether it's developer or the architect or the person designing this world, having to understand the movements of the person and what they're going to want to do, it sounds easy if we're making a game where there's limited options for what the user could do. But if you start speaking about like VR chat or something like that, where the potential movements that human could do is very wide, how do you plan around that? Is it going to be just case by case, we need to figure out what's in this world and develop around it? Or do you have to plan for what you don't even know that user is going to try to do, because they could try anything in reality?
Yeah, that was exactly my second point. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the answer is something like this. As architects, we take the human body and the activities that we use our body for as a given. Yes. Obviously, we're architects. We can't change any of that. And the kind of human activities that architecture is hosting have been developed over many, many years of evolution. So although some are trying, we can't really interfere that much with that. However, when we talk about the problem of architecture in virtual space, none of that holds true anymore. So my particular approach is to say architects should not design virtual environments after some kind of gameplay has already been decided, after the VR developer has already figured out what kind of body of locomotion. The virtual architect should be there in those first conceptual meetings, and everything should be designed as a whole.
So a good example would probably be from your, what I'll call, thesis on the Jeff level, from the Ken Pie podcast, where it seems like that level, like we knew what we have in Jeff, but it wasn't, we have Jeff, let's build around him. It seems like it was more conceptual right from the start. This is an experiment that we know how it plays out. How do we now incorporate Jeff to make this all happen? That's at least what I was getting from when you were speaking about that.
So that chapter was, I actually liked that chapter even more than the end with the mirroring and stuff. Because the psychological dimension of Jeff was just incredible for me. So there's this gameplay idea, but that could not be realized without the right environment, right? You could not get the same feeling if you were in a different kind of environment with Jeff. So you can see how you would need the environment designer working right next to the game designer to test these things and to come up with hypotheses. And there would be much, and they're basically developing the concept and testing the concept hand in hand. Because if you've read the interviews from the Half-Life designers, you'll see that, of course, they spent years prototyping and testing things. So it's not like someone came out with the idea, it was the Jeff idea was perfect, and then they got the environment designer to just figure out the thing. It had to go hand in hand. So I'm seeing a much closer interdisciplinary approach to these things than what we're seeing right now with physical architecture.
Yeah, that level was a beautiful level, because from start to finish, you buy in. There's times in games, like traditional games or even VR games, where I've killed a boss or killed an enemy, and it's meaningless. It is meaningless. I'm just killing to kill in that game, and that sounds weird, but it's true. But I killed Jeff on my playthrough, and I did hear that you didn't have to. And I felt bad, actually. Even though this thing was trying to murder me, like, I was stuck in very small quarters with designs that I always felt he was right there with me, and perpetual danger, even if he wasn't. And by the end of it, I actually felt a connection to him, one way or another. Even though he wanted to murder me, maybe I had some Stockholm Syndrome. I kind of wish I let him live. I can't understand why, but I do wish I let Jeff live. I know you don't play much VR games, though. Half-Life Alyx was, at the time when podcast I heard on you, that was the only game you had finished in VR.
Yes, that's still the case. I start a lot of games. I'm not going to name any. I'm obviously interested in testing things. Yeah, I'm missing the psychological complexity of Jeff. And that's not to say that all games need to have that. They do not. Absolutely not. It's just a personal statement that for me and for the kind of stuff that get me going, I need a bit more of that. And of course, the vast majority of players disagree with me because they're very happy with this kind of other stuff. But yeah.
I think any enthusiast is probably going to agree with you more than someone coming in new, but that's because they had a taste of what that was. But I am entirely with you. I would like more examples like that. I think we've spoken a lot about kind of the structure and architectural layout of like single player games. When it comes to social multiplayer games like VRChat and Neos and things like this, have you spent any time in that? Because I've got to think that's an interesting case for you, where you're probably watching architecture now that's definitely not built majorly by anyone who has any remote background, and where maybe, larger AAA title might pull in some consultants or something. Someone making a VR chat world, 9 out of 10 times, 99 of 100 will have zero background, just doing it. Are you seeing interesting patterns of people building things with like repetitive patterns or repetitive use cases that you just don't understand?
I don't know how. Nothing comes to mind, but I do want to say something about this. I am so ecstatic to see these people building these spaces, because for me, it's people without a background in architecture getting involved with producing spaces. Mm-hmm. And that is one of the best things to be able to witness as an architect.
Have you been to any of the VR chat marketplace events?
Yes.
Those are like when I originally reached out, or you reached out to me, I think first, and then we were speaking. That's kind of where my mind was, because I think at the time there was a virtual market going on, and I really have enjoyed those worlds because I'm just like when I collect everything in an RPG, I like to view every area, every nook and cranny. But sometimes it can get overwhelming with the design where things are all over the place. There really seems to be no rhyme or reason, and I can't get my bearings on where I should go. But those marketplaces, who's ever designed them, I think does a terrific job guiding me through them, where I see everything without having to worry about how I navigate the place. It almost feels like they put a lot of thought into the architecture of it and the design that guided me through it in a way that felt natural. I didn't think about it. I just went through this place.
Yeah, those kind of strategies, we deploy them in physical spaces as well. So good malls, parks, city centers are typically designed with a wayfinding strategy in mind and visual reference points to help you orient yourself. So I've seen the better examples of large VR chat environments do deploy those kind of strategies. But I love the fact that most of them are still not designed by architects, although it sounds a bit like a contradiction, because earlier I said I do want architects to claim this. But I feel like VR is giving people, it's offering people the possibility to discover creativity through space. And that has never in the past been something that someone without a training in architecture could enter into at all.
Sure. A little off topic, but more future thinking instead of what we have right now. So in your mind on, I'm sure it seems like you play more games as a like quality, looking at it and getting data points on what's working, what it's looking like. What are you seeing that in the next so we'll do short term, like 1-2 years. I think that's pretty short term when it comes to evolution, like where we were in like 2018, 19, 2 years, decent amounts changed. What's the low hanging fruit right now, architecturally wise, of VR games that more developers could do and even handle on, say, the bigger platforms right now, like Quest 2, that would be low hanging fruit, but provide a tremendous amount of value to the end user without crippling the developers and architects right now?
They should get an architect. They're cheap.
Don't undersell yourself.
They should get, well, no, it's true. I mean, wages in traditional architecture are abysmal. They should get an architect to consult. They should get maybe someone finishing a master thesis in architecture. I see amazing projects coming out of some architecture schools with very young people interested in gaming and trying to use the more open-minded architecture departments that let them do cool stuff. A lot of them already know how to use a game engine. So I think the value that they could offer would be tremendous.
What would be, like, specifically, what value could they do with the tech we have right now? Like, is there any specific case points of what they could put inside a game, whether it's something as small as how we're using doors, like lever designs or puzzle designs? Is there anything specific that you would want to see in the games right now that's doable?
So what I would specifically want to see is environments designed to be wow when you're in them, not look wow on a computer screen.
Okay.
There is a major difference. And most VR things that I'm trying clearly do not have an architect on board or someone that understands that difference.
What's a game that kind of screamed to you that looked really good when you were first time you saw it, and then in there drastically changed your perception?
A few come to mind, but I don't want to name any. I don't want to be negative about anyone's work.
It might not be negative. It might be a good data point for them to know about, but we don't have to name names. What type of game was it?
It was like an exploration game, I think. Yeah.
Okay. Does this also coincide with trailers to you, though? Like, is the whole design of a trailer also part of that problem?
It's part of a bit of a crisis that I think VR has. Like, it's a marketing problem that I don't think anyone has cracked, right? The way we communicate and market things is still using trailers and images. So there's huge pressure on making those look good, and people decide whether to buy something based on that. Like, I decide whether to try a VR thing or not, or to buy it based on a trailer. And yeah, that's still a problem we need to solve, like, fast.
Yeah, I don't know what other option you have right now. Like I have thought of this before because I get a little frustrated when I see trailers. It's blatantly always PCVR footage, which isn't a problem. You're showing me your game in the best light. I understand it. Um, but I'd like to see what I'm actually going to be seeing, which is different a lot of times if I'm going to be playing it on a different platform. But I have tried brainstorming in my head. How do we fix this? You have mixed reality trailers, which are, I think, a decent step, but still not fully there. I don't know how you do it unless my future thinking mind, like really far, is if we have some type of spectacles that are lightweight that can give you a decent immersive view. Maybe not a gameplay view, but something that's utilized extra in your life. Maybe you're using it for maps and like Google Glass type thing where it's got utility for your day-to-day life, but you can flip on an immersive mode where they'll show you some trailer where you're actually first person view inside that. Maybe that gives you a better scale and representation of what you're playing. But we're far away from things like that.
I would buy a bundle with samples. So the cosmetics industry sells samples, which is kind of brilliant because you pay for them, but it's also advertising. But the thing I like it is that you get like a tiny, tiny, tiny little bottle, and you get like 50 of them, so you can try stuff out. And I would pay for a VR application that gives me with the 100 scenes in a menu, and I can go and play 5 minutes of something or just look at the environment of something. Because right now I'm in a situation where I'm paying full price for stuff I want to try just to be in there for 10 minutes and realize I don't want to play until the end. So I would absolutely pay good money for this bundle of samples, right? So a company could even have that as their business model, where every studio gives them a little scene and then they just kind of compile it and sell it.
You don't seem like too much of a gamer, so I'll pull a deep pull. But like I remember like PS1, PS2 demo discs where it would just give you like 10 games. Like I remember Spyro and Tomb Raider and all these major ones, and they would only let you play a fraction of like the first level. But it was enough where I knew what games I wanted to play and which ones I definitely didn't. And those discs were typically free. Like you could buy a pair of shoes at a van store and then give you a demo disc with like a bunch of games. So yeah, so demo culture more or less is what we need instead of having to buy.
If free would be even better, of course. I'm just saying, I mean, I would also pay for them, given that, I'm paying full price I'm paying full price to discover whether I like something or not, because I know I can't use the trailer for that.
Yes. And right? I don't know if you're like me, but I get a little anxiety of returning too many games. Like I almost feel like it's negative in a way. That might be like an intrinsic value of like just me, but I tend to only buy games like I'm really, really positive I'm going to like. But if I think I'm gonna not like it, I almost sometimes hold off rather than try it and return it, because I almost feel like it's an insult to the developer. I don't know. That might just be me. I'm not sure if you have any thoughts on returns.
I don't return games. Since, as you said, I'm definitely not much of a gamer. I never played games before VR. I had no interest in games whatsoever. I didn't even know until very recently that returning a game is a thing.
Yeah.
But even after I found out, no, I never done it. I don't return things, even if I do play 5 minutes. Yeah.
What was the first application then, since it wasn't gaming that got you into VR? I'm sure you saw it, but what was the aha moment of quitting? I know we probably should have done this in like the first question, but so now we're here. Like, what was that aha moment that made you transition an entire career to a different plane?
It was not an application. It was this VR studio in Stuttgart invited me to take a look at what they're doing, and they had a demo for a car company, and basically it was the rooftop of a building and the car was there and nothing about it was like, I wasn't doing anything basically. But it was my first time ever in VR, and the reason why it blew me away and I switched to VR was because I thought that was architecture. Was because I did not see that as a big change. I saw it as a way to finally realize the kind of architecture that I really wanted to do.
That's beautiful. So so you're just taking your passion and realizing, oh, this is that extension. And you seem like a very forward thinker. Like when I see your tweets, like you're thinking 10 years further. Like when I see some of these, which I really appreciate. Like you, Kent Bye, there are a lot of people who just seem to be on like a different level of thought, rather than the now, just where we're going. Where's that come from? Like I want to find more people who are like you and Kent, talking like that on Twitter, because you guys are really going to be putting those ideas out there that someone's going to pick up if you guys don't, and take us there. But these ideas need to be thrown out, and I don't see them as much.
I think in my case, and maybe Kent's, if I would venture an opinion when it comes to him, it might be philosophy and a love of ideas, but not ideas for the sake of ideas. I think we both value the power that ideas could have when it comes to communities and when it comes to uncharted territory. So there are people that explore this uncharted territory by doing amazing demos, for example, and experimental stuff. And there are people that try to do that by thinking of the bigger picture, and the underlying assumption, which some might not agree with, is that there are bigger concepts that are behind almost everything that we do. And in a lot of ways, they're unexamined because we spend most of our time trying to make money, live our lives, etc. So how much time is there left at the end of a busy day to just start to read philosophy and think of the big ideas that drive humanity? But that doesn't mean they're not there, and that doesn't mean that other people are not thinking about them with good and not so good ends in mind.
Sure.
So we're trying, I think, to identify those big ideas, to even ask questions like, who are we in VR? Is this technology going to start to change our definitions of identity? And even questions like that, even asking them, I think, is valuable, even if no one has a clear answer right now, because we kind of know that it will change these things, and we kind of know that it will have huge repercussions in the future. So yeah, I think we just see value in that. And it's interesting that you asked this, because I know some people on Twitter also comment things like they make negative comments when it comes to the usefulness of the humanities and the usefulness of philosophy. And I see lots of comments with things like, well, philosophy was the science 2000 years ago, but now we have not science. So what is this thing doing? What is like ideas doing? So I think there's clearly a place for philosophy and ideas, yes, and the humanities in society. And there's clearly a side of human activity that is not covered by science, and that requires a totally different methodology than science.
Yes, I've never been a detractor of the humanities being important to VR. However, my early days, I definitely did not think they were super important. Since I've been in VR more, I have had numerous experiences where I have felt uncomfortable, not in the sense of like disgust or anything that's super negative on the experience, but uncomfortable of self-understand. I'm like, I almost saw myself like astral projected, looking down and thinking like, oh, why'd you just do that? That's not you. I know that's not me, but I did that. Now that's me here. And there's now it's like, okay, now I understand why we've got to be asking these questions because for a moment I thought I had a brain skip, and I was like, that's not me, and but now I understand it is me. It just happened to be me, and that's only ever going to happen in VR. That's interesting. You brought up repercussions. I don't like to get too negative, but I think it's important also. You brought up control. These architects and developers and people making immersion by definition is a controlled environment to a degree. You can control a lot. In what ways can the architectural design of a VR game, level, experience, application, whatever, where can that be abused currently to possibly make a poor experience or negatively affect the user? Is there certain things you're seeing, and maybe by purpose or just by accident, an unintended consequence of a current design?
So I'm going to answer this, but not just when it comes to the environment, because as I was saying earlier, I don't think we need to think of designing the environment separately from designing the other things.
Sure.
So I'm thinking of the strategy for the environment going hand in hand with a strategy for gameplay, for the avatar, locomotion, and all of those things. So you mentioned what sounded like an out-of-body experience that you had in VR.
Yes, yes. There was an action I said and did that was contrary to everything I've ever done, but I had I had the knowledge at the time to look at that and go, "Oh wow!" So I kind of noticed it at the time, and it was interesting. Yes.
So, what would you say if I told you that we can produce out-of-body experiences in VR within minutes?
I'd be like, "Show me it."
So, it's totally possible. I've been playing with stuff like that. There was a study done at the University in Zurich at the ETH where they induced amazing out-of-body experiences pretty quickly in VR. It was done within a study about consciousness. So I think it was a mixed study between philosophy and neuroscience. And so where do I see the dangers? Well, imagine certain companies or developers creating entire applications where they have the power to put you into an out-of-body experience. And once you are there, unless you are extremely used to that, you will be in a very, very vulnerable position.
Yes.
Because you are in what's referred to right now as an altered state of consciousness. It's similar to when you're having lucid dreams and things like that. So for a brief period or not so brief period, your brain actually transitions to a slightly different state. And yeah, you are vulnerable as hell. And is that an unprecedented kind of power? Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah, and then I think going down the rabbit hole in that, which I'm becoming less and less of a pessimist on it, but I still have my concerns, is you add in the tech features that might come with the hardware. So you have that design that puts you in an out-of-body experience, then combine that with something like eye tracking. So now you have them in an altered state and a wealth of information that they don't even understand what you're taking. It can be used it's nerve-wracking to a degree, but there's a lot of applications where that's going to be very useful and helpful at the same time. Just depends who's using it.
Yeah, I think there's a lot we don't know about it. My particular goal is to just make more and more people aware of these things. And I think there's a small community of people, myself included, that have had experiences like this in the past, like before VR. Mm-hmm. And we are more familiar with this. Like the second I tried VR, so the first time I tried VR was in that VR company in Stuttgart, and then I quit my job. But then I learned Unity. I ordered my Vive like many years ago, and the very first thing I did as soon as I plugged in my Vive to my computer and like got it to work in play mode in Unity, was to mess up with a camera and to try to induce these out of body experiences, because there were things I was familiar with from other experiences. And like I intuitively knew that this medium would just be perfect for that, and it was. So
Are you able to share that other experience that you had experience with before trying it in VR?
Oh, the other experience is just me inducing it basically through meditation. Sure. But I feel like there are people that maybe are less aware of these things just because they don't have a personal history with this, let's call them altered states of consciousness, that might not be aware of these new dangers that might be coming in from that direction in combination with this tech.
That makes sense. I also think of it in the sense that who's ever developing these experiences or games, their self-conscious has to be kind of in this world as well. Like I speak with some people who make games, like I think Anton was speaking to you on Twitter. I don't know if you've played his game, but I have to imagine that is much of Anton in that game. Like I'm embodying a bit of him every time I'm in that game, which is a very interesting point because I'm seeing the architecture, the design, the ideas, everything through his lens. I'm hoping that he set me up for success so I can enjoy that, but it's not missed on me that this entire structure and architecture structure of his creation is his brain personified in a certain way, which is interesting when you think I'm playing inside his head in a way. And I thought that was really neat when you guys were bringing that up. I never thought of it that way until I kind of read that.
Yeah, I think that's one of the more positive aspects of this whole conversation. I think it's quite exciting to be able to, meet someone at home, quote unquote, right? And it's what makes VR, I think, interesting for artists, right? Because in a way, that's what art is. You're trying to express yourself and you're trying to communicate these thoughts that are not appropriate for words into sounds or shapes or whatever, because you can't speak them out, right? It's the kind of stuff that's not spokeable. So now all of a sudden you can immerse people in there without, building a whole building or waiting for a rich guy to give you 100 billion to build it, so you can put someone in there so they finally know what it feels like to be in your head.
Yes, yeah, it's unique. Everything about VR is very unique. I know when I got into it, what was it like? When was the Vive? Like 16, 17?
Yeah, 16 maybe.
Something around there. So 5 years. It's really nuts where we've come, and where it originally was just a tool for me to have fun and blast a couple of baddies out of the sky, has really changed my perception on the utility of it, practical applications, and just the emotional aspects of it all, which I've really enjoyed. We are about at the hour mark. I usually on the live streams at this point, as the last topic to kind of bring it home, however long the topic takes, there's no time limit, kind of give you the floor on any topics that we haven't spoken about, something you're really passionate about that you'd like to talk through or the listeners to kind of hear about. Because I think there's a lot of topics that people like me just don't even know to bring up. And that's why I always give the kind of last topic to the guest.
I think we did a pretty good job of covering the things that I care the most about. One thing I want to add actually relates to what you just said, and I want to make it a question for you.
Sure.
Have the last 5 years changed your perception of reality with capital R? Do you think of the world and yourself in it and the possibilities of humans living their lives differently now that you have experienced these crazy alternative realities, or you just don't see a connection at all?
I'm seeing it more and more lately. So the thing that's confusing me, well, not confusing me, but opening my thought to, yes, there's a difference here, is I've always been very prideful of being extroverted, and not the sense of like crazy party animal, but like my wife could say I have a work party. I don't know anyone there, but I'm more than happy to go. I'll meet people, I'll talk, and I'll learn, and it'd be fun. And I don't have any anxiety to do that. Everything in social VR causes me anxiety, and it can't be because it's in game. It can't be just one thing. It's a mix of, I think I'm a different human being in there. I think everything that I ever learned and became IRL and what shaped me to be who I am today, the second I jump into VR chat, I feel that's all gone. It is scary, but that has acknowledged to me that what I am here is just a product of this reality. If jumping into VR chat changes me to the point where I'm anxious and everything I'm good at IRL changes, then I acknowledge it's a different reality. And I have to acknowledge that's a life that might be better for somebody, and they may be as comfortable and confident as I feel IRL. That's just how they are VR wise, and that's the life they want, and they may want to eventually live majorly in there, which that means I agree. I have now agreed that, yeah, it's a different world. I completely understand how people could live in there, want to live in there, and create their life in there. It's almost like no different than if you're biologically a guy but you identify as a female. It's what's the word? It's like an input issue. Your brain's different than what your body's telling you. But virtual reality, if you switch that all, that's a whole different world for you. And yeah, I think I answered your question. I might have gone around it, but yeah, I have probably in the past year or two, as the tech has become more comfortable and I've used it more, especially with the Oculus Quest 2, that's when it really dawned on me that the differences and my inadequacies inside VR, that, yeah, it's a different world. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes total sense. How do you think we're gonna deal with that when more and more work related things will happen in VR? Because that's kind of where the big push is right now with marketing, right? For companies to adopt this. How do you feel about that? Because then you'll be forced to deal with this other you that you're not as comfortable with.
I think it's gonna take a while for that, for the tech to be a utility that I want to use for an entire workday, all in VR. However, I'm open to it in the sense that right now, like work-life balance for a lot of people, it's dictated on, where you live might be entirely dependent on where you're working, but not ideally where you want to live. VR will give you the opportunity to do that. As the older I get and the more I work per week, unfortunately, the more now I value my time away from work. So if my work life just happens to be all in VR, it's just another environment. It's no different than going to the workplace. It's an environment that I'm going to have to understand, adapt to, and learn. But the good news is you can jump out of it, and I can have a virtual self that I work on, and then I can have the comfortability of outside of it. So if we're moving to a place where I'll be working inside VR, I think that is a net positive. I just hope people have options, or a slow transition, that they can enjoy both worlds to what makes them feel comfortable. They know they'll have to learn both, but to give them the ability to enjoy both. If it's all forced on us, then I get a little more concerned because maybe it's not right for everybody. But I'm open to it. I think it will have more net positives than negatives. I think it will lead to more accessibility, an open world, and more freedom of choice for the individual to live a life outside of work that they actually want to. So I'm entirely for it. How about yourself? It's a good question.
I recently watched this video by an anthropologist, Amber Case, who talks about how we have a physical persona and a digital persona, and each of these two personas go through adolescence. And she defines adolescence as, this time where everything you do feels awkward because you haven't really gotten the rules yet. So you go through that in physical reality, and then for a lot of people, especially the generations that were not born with a phone in their hands, they had to go through the second adolescence where they started on Twitter and they started on Facebook, and things are kind of weird, and you take people's responses sometimes amid in the wrong way. So it's interesting what you're describing reminded me of that maybe you're still going through the VR chat, social VR adolescence.
I would agree, and I think that kind of hits the nail on the head more, because even my social, social networking, or online persona, non-VR related, is also kind of in its adolescence. So like my Facebook was made in 2008 by force by a roommate who said you have to have one when you start college. Like, so 2008 was made by force, didn't use it. Twitter was made in 2008, didn't use it. Like, until I made the YouTube channel, which was 2017, 18, that's kind of when I started actually using social media daily. So I believe my social media like birthday of birth was actually like 2017. So I'm like very still figuring it out myself. And then the VR, it's even sooner than that. So that makes sense that it's a whole new adolescence that I think people like me are definitely figuring out, because I have not navigated it well.
My concern is, are there any things that we need to do to get society ready for life across a multitude of realities? Because I don't think we're just talking about VR. I think there will be multiple virtual realities. I think they might each have different physics, different affordances. Like, you might be going to work into one VR world where you, for whatever reason, will have to have the body of an octopus. And then your brain will switch into that mode because we know it's capable of. And then you're gonna have a 4-hour workshop for some other thing you're involved in some other place where you're gonna have like a humanoid avatar, and maybe also other kind of dimensions. So I think the worry that I have is that it's not just gonna be an adolescence for VR as a whole, but that we might be required to switch between multiple systems. And I don't know to what extent we'll be able to cope with that. And to what extent that is gonna create more barriers for certain kind of people.
Yeah, I do not have an answer for that. I can tell you my concern of what I'm going to work the hardest on myself and my wife, and definitely on raising my kid, is I think it's going to take an intense and incredible mental strength to handle it all. Social media is mentally draining, content creating mentally draining, new things, understanding social cues and new kind of pressures that come along with it in VR. I think it's going to be mentally draining to a lot of people. And I think if there's anything I hope as time moves on, whether it's the design of the game, developers take into account, is just helping give the tools to cope with that all. And some type of small educational process early on, maybe even at school, for people to understand kind of things we've talked about, that it's not just you online. This is the whole architecture of your brain changing. So mental strength is really what I'm focusing on, and I'm hoping to see tools, education, and things coming down the road to help people through this, because if there's no help through it, this is one nasty rabbit hole. It's a nasty wormhole, VR, XR, whatever, if you're unprepared. And right now we're so early on that the problems aren't that big yet, and we may not even realize they're problems until they're big. So it's a nasty, nasty wormhole that I just hope people have tools to prepare for it and they're ready for it. I think that's all I can. It's not an answer. It's just what I hope to see.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
But Andrea, I think we'll call it there, just for time's sake. This, I gotta say, like, I'm not trying to like talk. I won't talk negatively on anyone who's been on the show, but this has been definitely one of the most interesting that we've done so far, where I feel there's a different vibe to my thought process every day, almost, with VR, and these thoughts about like an altered presence or altered mind. It's really important to me. I can't wait to clip these and show people that, because I think these are really what I want people to think about, that it's not just you playing a game, like take you out of the equation. It's eventually going to be so immersive where the you, when you put on the headset, disappears, and it's an entire, and you outside exists, but it will only re-exist when you take off that headset. Inside the headset, the you is now changed, and people are starting to think about this more. I definitely see it, and it's a great little enlightenment period. But I hope that's across the board a standard thought eventually, and I think people like you are going to help bring us there.
I hope so too. I mean, that's why I do these things, and that's why I tweet the stuff that I tweet. And I feel like that's the most or that's the most valuable thing that I can do given my means and the kind of knowledge that I have. So I'm super happy to hear that you think there's like legitimate value in making this more of a thing people talk about.
Absolutely. We just gotta, we'll end it with the thought of like, we're all just trying to build the VR world or the world that we hope to see. So that's all we can do right now is bring up the questions and hope to bring it up so someone who is changing things, who is making the stuff, sees those questions and thinks about that as they make these experiences. But Andrea, that was a blast, and that's gonna be it, guys. If you're still here on this recording, you notice that this was not a stream this time, everybody. If you can't stay for the entire thing, go to the Eric Present Clips channel. I'll be clipping this entirety, so you won't miss anything. We'll just split them up into more tangible bits. But other than that, Andrea, thank you again, and everyone viewing, we'll see you next time, Space Cowboys.